Thank you for reminding me.
And let's go ahead and pass it on to Leah for an introduction.
Leah's on mute.
Leah, you're muted. Okay, there she is.
There she goes. Nope.
Okay, sorry about that. So I'm Leah Young. I live in the Crozet area, and Lily won't get to see what I look like until the next meeting because I don't have very good internet service. So I'm gonna stay blank with no video for the meeting. And my focus, Lily, is typically wildlife corridors.
Okay. Is that me now?
Yeah, you go ahead and go, and then we're gonna have Peggy Cornett.
I don't know how much you want to know, but I'm Lily Engel. My husband and I moved down to Charlottesville a year ago, April. So I've been a lawyer for 27 years. I was in private practice in Alexandria for 10, and I've been with an organization called the Conservation Fund for the past 17. We live down about a mile from Walnut Creek Park, and we have 21 acres. And I'm a Charlottesville area tree steward. We both are. And we spend our free time removing non-native invasive species from our property too, because that's all you do. But anyway, we're really excited to be down here. I went to law school here, so it's kind of a boomerang thing.
All right, excited to have you. And then Peggy.
Peggy Cornett, curator of plants at Monticello, and I've been involved with the Natural Heritage Committee for a number of years. I'm mostly interested in, ecology, native plants. My background is botany, and I, also have a big concern for restoration of environmental restorations and removal of invasive species as well. So worked at Monticello for many years.
Hey, Scott, I don't know if you noticed, but Abigail is also in the attendees waiting area.
Switch that over.
Should we wait till she is a part of the panel before we move on?
And I just want to say, Lily, my background is in education. I'm
Okay.
a former middle school science teacher. So what I focus on, what a lot of my focus has been on ways of educating the public about the importance of biodiversity and how to get that message out there. And so
Yeah.
that's sort of my passion and my background.
A large part of what my organization does too. I did want to say, if you all want to ever see a tour or see a restoration in process, you should come to our property. We have before and after pictures that are kind of astonishing. So it's a work in progress. And we did have a large section, all of it was by hand until 2 weeks ago, when we actually hired a forestry mulcher because there was about 5 acres of bittersweet that I gave up. It couldn't be done. Either napalm or a forestry mulcher. So we hired the forestry mulcher, and now I've seeded it, and we'll see what happens. But
That would be really interesting.
you should come over, I'm telling you. We're gonna have a Charlottesville area tree stewards class here actually on invasives and restoration. So it's a really good demonstration project of the ups and downs of trying to do this on your own.
Yeah, that would be great for us to see.
Should we have Abigail do an introduction before we progress? Abigail, if you don't mind, you have baby with you.
Hey everyone, my name's Abigail Crozet. This is Frederick. He's a month old today. What else do you want to know?
How many years have you been on the committee?
Oh, I think it's been a year and a half now. I've mostly was helping out with educational stuff. But I'm also interested in ecological restoration and have worked with Center for Urban Habitats a little bit, helping them get translated into a nonprofit. I'd love to see your land, Lily. That sounds amazing. What a transformation.
It's you're welcome anytime. We're here. all the time, working from home.
Wonderful.
Well, great. I'm glad everyone's able to make it here virtually. It's nice to be at our own homes on this rainy afternoon. If no one else has anything else to say, we'll move on to approving the agenda. Or Leah has a question. Do you want to, you have your hand raised at least, I mean.
Yep, thank you, Megan. You're good at this already. Yay. Because you're noticing all these things. I just wanted to see if we could get Lily's email address so that I can like be in touch with other members of the committee.
Lily, if you wanted to drop in the chat, you're welcome, or we can do it separately or.
And I can share that also with the other members because I've got it.
Okay, that works. Thank you.
And I'll get it added
I
to
just
the
put it in
group
the
email
chat
list.
and included a typo in my, but it's not in the email address.
And someone make sure to add Lily to the Google Drive as well.
And I did that
You
today.
did that this morning. I've already looked at everything.
Well, see, that's why you're such a great chair.
All right, so here's the agenda. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda for today?
I move to approve the agenda.
And I will second it.
Everyone in favor of approving the agenda, if you could raise your hand or say aye.
Aye.
Actually, there should be a roll call vote for this since it's online meeting. So, so if Scott, if you could call the roll.
Alrighty, Christine,
Do you want me to call? Yes.
Peggy,
Aye.
Lily,
Oh,
Aye.
Leah, sorry. There's a weird delay in the line somewhere. Lonnie,
Aye.
Megan,
Okay,
and Abigail.
Aye.
all right. So the agenda has been approved. Thank you, Lonnie and Christine. Has everyone had a chance to review the July minutes? And if so, did anyone have any edits they would like to incorporate? Not
I have,
hearing-
this is Leah. I have a question.
Yeah,
And that is, in the minutes, it mentioned that Dan was going to set up a program. This is under like the training. It was suggested we set up a training program for new members. But I wasn't clear. I thought that Dan said he was going to set up some tours of some of the like important sites that are, what am I trying to say? Not open space, county land. So I wanted to clarify that. I wasn't sure.
yeah, I think that
Which it was.
needs to be clarified. And I will amend that.
Awesome, thanks.
great. Is that under a certain number? I guess, yeah, you'll make amends. That's great.
And you all can make a motion if you want to approve the minutes with that change or with any other changes you'll make. We don't need to edit it live.
Gotcha. Would anyone like to make a motion with that change included?
I make the motion to approve the July minute with the edit.
I second it.
Peggy said, thank you. And then I think we do roll call to,
All right. Go back through the order again the same way. Christine,
Yes.
Peggy,
Aye.
Lily,
Aye.
Leah,
Yes,
Lonnie,
Aye.
Megan,
aye.
and Abigail.
Aye.
Great. So with that, the minutes from July have been approved with edits. Does anyone from the public have anything that they would like to add to the agenda? I guess you can either raise your hand or I don't know if you can type them in the chat.
Yeah, for the attendees, if any of you had anything you wanted to talk about under other matters, please just hit the raise hand button in your Zoom window and we'll get you freed up to speak.
And I just want to recognize that we have a really nice group of attendees, and I just want to express my appreciation that you guys are here and taking some time this evening to join us. We really do appreciate it.
I don't see any raised hands at the moment.
All right. So our next on the agenda item is follow-ups. Does anyone have any follow-ups on important sites or outreach?
I do have one brief update. So when I was out running on the Rivanna Trail, since we're going to be mentioning the Rivanna recently, one of the really interesting species that you can see along the Rivanna that is rare in Albemarle, not rare in the state, but rare in Albemarle, is Commelina erecta. And we reconfirmed several spots for that along the Rivanna, along the, although it's on the Charlottesville side, it's still a very important species. You should familiarize yourself with the difference between Commelina erecta and Commelina communis, which is the Asiatic dayflower. They're, if you see them next to one another, you can very easily tell. I have a photograph I can send people. But the native is very important. We also there was some right across from the people to do the Rivanna. I forget what they're called, but the people to do the kayaking up and down the Rivanna and the tubing and stuff. So I told them too. They're very excited that there was a Albemarle County rare species right across from their establishments that showed them where it was and gave them some suggestions on that. And then also another one is Amorpha, or lead flower is another, is a shrub that also grows along the Rivanna River on that side as well. That's pretty easy to see in several spots, but also it's uncommon in the county. So
I've seen that Commelina too on the trail. I think I photographed it a couple of years ago.
nice.
I'm kind of amazed about the Amorpha. That's more of a coastal plain plant.
Well, yeah, and so
Right.
also the Commelina erecta is also
Yeah.
is more common on the coastal plain. I think it's because the banks of the Rivanna are very sandy.
Mm-hmm.
So you do get plants along the banks that prefer sandier soil. So
Yeah.
it makes it kind of an unusual habitat. So then, as we're talking about, the importance of the Rivanna and, as a unique ecosystem within our county, that's one thing to keep in mind is that there are some conditions there that make it special.
And since we're talking about the Rivanna and Old Mills Trail area, I just want to give a shout out to Jesse Wingo, who is in on the call today, who's working for Albemarle County Parks and Rec, and who has been leading some citizens in invasive plant removal and how important that is going to be to protect any of those species. And she's just doing an amazing job in leading those crews and engaging citizens to be involved and really doing a lot of important education along the way. So kudos to Jesse.
Yeah, and that's extremely important because a lot of the places that we saw some of these rare species, they're hemmed in on all sides with invasive plants. And so in many ways, it was only because there's a little mown strip along the side that allowed them to survive in that little window between the mown strip and the invasive plants. So I think management is very important if we're going to keep some of these rare species along the Rivanna.
Mm-hmm. Can I make another, I just want to tell you that I'm collecting seed for the Clifton Institute, and they're starting out with a program where they're trying to collect local ecotypes of 20 different species and grow them out. And the Blenheim grasslands, I'm collecting quite a bit of seed there. So I just want to make a note that some of these important sites they are rich in biodiversity, but they also contain some really important seed banks. And so I just want to mention that.
That's great. Wonderful. And then we wanted to hear a follow-up about the for the Friends of the Mormon, but I know you're rebranded as Friends of the Mormon, but this is Peggy. You're hoping to have an update, not Peggy Cornett, but I think
Peggy
Peggy
Gilbert.
G.
Scott, can we,
Yeah, let me re-promote. Okay, here, hang on just a moment.
And we'll have to have her remind us what they are now called.
Okay, I've resent the panelist link or button. There we go.
Saw Peggy earlier. She popped up on the screen.
Yeah, she just popped up in our panelist link.
Unmute. Okay. Hi there.
Hi, Peggy.
Thank you for having me back. I'm a member of the Mormon Scenic River Advisory Committee. And when I came to you last month, it was to share our concerns that we have about the very low flow we've been seeing in the Mormons River in Sugar Hollow. And the consequences of that low flow, including high water temperatures below the dam and low oxygen levels. And we had a meeting with the Ravenna Water and Sewer Authority, where we learned that they had changed their protocols about releasing water from the reservoir to the river below the dam. And they were actually letting it go for as much as a day or two without any flow from the reservoir over the dam into the river in Sugar Hollow. They changed their protocol on that so that they're checking it every day. And when there is no water coming over the dam, they're releasing some water through a pipe that sort of sprays. It's sort of like a fire hose. It's constantly shooting a spray of water into the cofferdam pool, which then can flow into the river. So that, you know, our issue has been that when there's flow, obvious flow, healthy flow in the north and south forks of the Mormons River above the reservoir, we're not seeing that flow mimicked below the dam, and there should be more water. So they partially sort of met our concerns. But we've had a new wrinkle, which is that in the end of July, we got an email from Andrea Bowles, who's the water resource manager for Ravenna. And she explained that really due to their concerns about climate change, they now would like to begin raising the water level at the Ragged Mountain Reservoir sooner than had initially been planned. Our community water supply plan, the idea was to support the health of the Mormons River by phasing out the use of the Mormons pipeline, the Sugar Hollow Reservoir pipeline to Ragged Mountain, and replacing that with a pipeline that would move water to and from the South Fork Ravenna Reservoir to Ragged Mountain. That project is moving forward, but it's looking like it won't be completed. That pipeline between the South Fork and the Ragged Mountain won't be completed before 2026 at the earliest, and 2030 is more likely. So that means that they'll continue using the Sugar Hollow pipeline to feed water into Ragged Mountain. And they are wanting to know how we feel about, starting to fill the Ragged Mountain Reservoir with another 12 feet of water now, like just to err on the side of caution. That would give Ragged Mountain another 700 million gallons of water, which is a 50% increase in the holding, the storage capacity of that reservoir. That's going to be the goal. And we have not responded really as a group yet to this proposal. We've asked for more specifics because the idea is that they would only pull more water out of Sugar Hollow's reservoir for Ragged Mountain when there was a lot of inflow, a high rainfalls, for example, like the kind that we see occasionally now where we get a couple of inches of rain. But we still have concerns because we see that the river is still running very low, and we've asked Rivanna about bringing in modern technology to measure the actual inflow from the North and South Fork into Sugar Hollow Reservoir and the actual outflow from the dam. A new rubber bladder was installed. I talked to you all about that and showed you pictures of it on top of the dam. And we're feeling that maybe that has changed the formula. They're also using a gauge 13 miles downriver to estimate the flow, and we just feel that it's not as accurate as it might be. So I think the same concerns apply, and we're so grateful for your support. We remain with this concern that we need to have a more direct measurements of flow. We also really want to see, Rivanna makes the case that, it's their responsibility to supply water to the community, which we all understand, but we want for them to go back sort of to the original concept of the community water plan, which was to let more water run down the Rivanna freely, filling the South Fork. That's where it ultimately, the water from the Mormons ultimately ends up. And then it could be piped back and forth in between Ragged Mountain and South Fork through this new pipeline. You all have recognized through the Biodiversity Action Plan how significant the Mormons River corridor is for species, for aquatic habitat, for climate change mitigation. And it's one of the kind of remaining intact areas, largest remaining intact areas of the county due to the adjacency to the SNP, and many property owners have put conservation easements in that area. So we really would like Rivanna to recognize that there needs to be an equalization between providing water for the community and protecting this important feature of our landscape. And we feel that maybe Rivanna could take advantage of this need to fill Ragged Mountain by another 700 million gallons by emphasizing mindful consumption of water throughout our community. And we want to, we see that they very possibly are changes that are occurring in the Mormons River and the corridor due to climate change, just as they have concerns about supplying the community with sufficient water in case of a drought of record like 2002. We have concerns about how the biome may be being impacted by climate change. And we just want them to give greater attention to the possible effects of seasons and changes in flow on temperature and oxygen levels in the river. So we're going to be having a meeting, and we still would be so very grateful for your letter in support of our asks, I guess you could say, for Rivanna, but we haven't yet determined what exactly we should ask for, and we're waiting to hear a little bit more from them about this proposal, this recent proposal, to take more water out of the reservoir for beginning to fill up Ragged Mountain to its full capacity. And I'll leave you there. I'm going to stay on the meeting because we're very, very interested in the stream health initiatives, of course. And we will be writing to the board and in support of the initiatives that are being considered soon. And so I want to hear Scott take us through all that. And I'll be reporting back to the Mormons Scenic River Advisory Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. That was great. Yeah, we are happy to write a letter on your behalf. And once those key points are kind of finalized, we can definitely touch on them in our letters to make sure that we're reiterating what your all's goals are. So yeah, thank you so much for that. That was great.
You're very welcome.
Well, I guess
As a matter of, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Say, as a matter of committee business, just to stay within the guidelines of FOIA. If, one or two members want to work directly with Peggy or the group on what that letter might contain, that's fine. Just please remember to keep it as to two or less so that you're not forming a public meeting that has to be scheduled and noticed and all of that. But then if there's a committee approval that's needed of a particular letter, that'll have to come back to an upcoming meeting so that we can have an actual action on the committee voting in favor of that letter. So just to think about planning ahead, if there's going to be a letter, it'd be good to have it ready enough in advance of whatever meeting that we can get it distributed to everybody and then have a vote in the public meeting.
That's a great reminder, Scott. Thank you. We can certainly make that a goal to get it.
And I can help in between meetings on.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, I think that's a great segue to your staff update. If you would like to go ahead, Scott.
Sure. In just a moment here, I just want to change which screen I'm sharing. So turn my camera on.
I just have to say, Frederick is the sweetest baby.
Right now.
We need to make him an honorary member.
I think so.
All right.
Has he been, well, we'll have to talk another time, Abigail.
Well, I am perfectly willing to acknowledge that Frederick is more interesting than my staff update, but I'll try to do this briefly. As I believe all of you know now, the stream health initiative that the county worked on over the last few years with the work of my predecessor, Kim Biasioli, there were 14 action items identified by that initiative for protecting stream health and water quality in the county. And the first one of which the county has been working on is called the Riparian Buffer Overlay District. To give you a little bit of history on this, the county has had stream buffer protections in the county code since late 90s, early 2000s. And in the original version of that ordinance, we had fairly strong ordinance protections of stream buffers, both in the development areas and in the rural areas. There was even, to some extent, some limited buffer requirement for crop agriculture, not grazing. But unfortunately, while we had a quite good ordinance, we didn't have resources to enforce it, especially across a county as large as this one. And the regulations were quite a bit simplified and pulled back in about 2014, so that our current stream buffer protections in the water protection ordinance only really apply to projects that have that meet the area and impact requirements to require state regulation for erosion sediment control and stormwater. So rather than protecting all buffers across the county, at least as they're currently mapped, it's really only a regulation that affects certain development projects. The proposal that came out of the Stream Health Initiative was to try to regain quite a bit of the riparian buffer protections that we had back before 2014 by going back to a requirement for not disturbing the identified buffers. And I can show you all a map a little later if you want. Moving the ordinance out of the water protection ordinance into the zoning ordinance as what's called a zoning overlay. So what you see now is the map of the water protection ordinance buffers. That same outline would become its own zoning district that lies on top of whatever happens to be the base district underneath, which might be rural areas or highway commercial or whatever it is. And having it in the zoning ordinance gives us a better enforcement mechanism, and we have enforcement staff and would theoretically hire another staff person to help enforce this. So after the public input phase of the Stream Health Initiative, where we got that direction to do those 14 tasks, and we have started on number 1 here, which is this overlay district. We on staff here, several of us worked together to come up with a draft ordinance. And then about 2 weeks ago, I believe, we put it out for public comment. So some of you have no doubt seen this site that I have on the share here. And if you haven't, I would encourage you to look at it. I can put the link in the chat when I'm done here. Just to quickly go over it. This is our public input site, and we're trying to get everyone's feedback on the proposed new ordinance. There's a few different things on here, and including a couple of things that weren't there at the very beginning. So with a summary of what we're doing. There, originally we had up this link here that says all draft ordinance changes, and that is, I don't know, 30 some pages of dense legalese of ordinance changes. And it's not just the zoning ordinance. There's lots of other references to buffers throughout the ordinances and those changes. We had a lot of feedback from people. That's too much to read, guys. So we put up this link here, the draft of new zoning overlay, which is just a clean copy of just what the actual new buffer regulations are. So if you're limited in time, you might want to focus on that one. Down below, there's a feedback area where you can, after you've read these drafts, there's a form. You can click that button there, and there's a form that will allow you to provide your feedback. We've heard from quite a few people so far, and I'm sure we will continue to. Up here at the top of the page, we also added this summary of proposed buffer requirements, which kind of boils the new overlay district down to a one-pager. So again, that's pretty recent that we added that in response to folks concerned that we were kind of burying them with far too many pages of things to read, which was a fair point. So if you click on that summary, you get this one-pager here, which talks about what the regulations would be and where they would apply in the development areas versus in the public water supply impoundments that might be, are mostly in the rural areas, except for Crozet, which is a development area, and summarizes what the requirements are. Essentially, we will be returning to the state of requiring by law that buffer vegetation that exists should remain, and then having a limited list of activities that can happen within the districts or within the overlay district. Include some of these here, like agriculture and forestry, which by state law we need to permit. Some basic improvements like utilities and transportation, water dependent facilities, buffer vegetation management, all of those things, some of which would be permitted, some other things would be permitted. Or if they were permitted, it's kind of a judgment call by the program administrator, but if they're permitted, they can only be permitted with a mitigation plan that offsets the impacts. So it is pretty detailed. I hope the one pager here is helpful to folks. And anytime you all have questions, you can either write to this Stream Health address here that's on the site, or you can just write directly to me. I'll get it either way, and I'm happy to answer questions. We've had quite a few questions, some from Lonnie, some from a few other people, and we're kind of working through those right now to get good, complete, accurate answers on the detailed questions that people have sent. We're trying to get those ready pretty soon. So that's a very quick summary of what's going on there, but I would be happy to answer any questions that you all have about the ordinance and how it might work. And before we do that, I should say the next step with this is we'll be taking public input through this site, I think through the 13th of this month, at which point we're going to work on summarizing and responding to the concerns raised in the input so we can make changes to the draft ordinance as necessary. And then I believe that we will have a work session with the Planning Commission in late September to get their input on the draft and any changes that might be needed. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you all have.
I see Lonnie has his hand up. Would you like to go?
Yeah, Scott, so you have a bunch of my questions already in writing, so it's not going to be a surprise to you, but I'll ask them again because the committee probably hasn't heard them. It seems like after going through the finer details of this, that this ordinance appears to be significantly less restrictive than the 2014 ordinance. And they're seeing, in several points. One is a key element of the 2014 ordinance was that if a buffer did not exist, that there was a requirement to establish a buffer. That seems to be absent from this. It also appears to be absent. It also appeared to be part of our current ordinance in terms of the growth area. If someone was developing a parcel, that they had to establish a buffer if it didn't already exist. And that seems to be struck out of that would be removed out of our current ordinance as well. So that seems that's my number one most problematic aspect of this. On the transportation piece, before, it looked like in the past that it was expressly like if VDOT was building a road that had to be allowed in the buffer. But now it looks like transportation improvements generally are included, which seems to be would mean that a private road would be allowed through a stream buffer, which is not something that's currently allowed in our ordinance. So that's another piece that seems to be very different. And also, it appeared to me that we were allowing renovation. So if someone had an existing impingement upon the buffer, they're doing a renovation and they wanted to expand, like let's say they had a small house and they would make it a much larger house, that they could expand the buffer of the footprint of the house further into the buffer than it already was. And that was not part of the 2014 ordinance, as far as I could tell. And so, and there are other little bits and pieces there. I know that I and some others have encouraged the Southern Environmental Law Center to take a deep dive on this ordinance, and maybe you've gotten some of the feedback from Morgan Butler on this already.
Not yet, but I'm guessing we will.
And so, so I would encourage, you look at that when that's there. My big concern is like if water quality had improved since 2014, if we're like, oh, our streams are so much healthier now, do we really need all this regulation? Then I could see loosening our regulations. But if we look at the data, our stream health has gotten worse since 2014. So we have more impairment, not less. So it'd make more sense to have more regulation, or we should be doing more to improve stream health than we were in 2014. But it looks like we're doing what's being proposed is significantly weaker than what we had in 2014. And that to me seems really problematic. If we're trying to get to healthier streams, we need to do more, not less. So.
Well, isn't the idea that what this is just going to be more enforceable?
So yes and no. I think moving it to the zoning ordinance is a positive thing. The overall concept I strongly support. I think it's a great idea to move this into the zoning ordinance. That's great. I do have some concerns about it in the sense that I guess another comment related to that is, and it may be a question Scott could answer. Currently, when someone's developing, right? We have very poor records of streams in the rural area. So often what happens, someone goes to do a development, staff pays a visit, and it's not unusual to discover streams that were not on the county's GIS, that we had no idea were there. So I guess if we're switching over to an overlay district where the protection of the streams is based upon them being in the zoning overlay, where does that leave the past policy of protection of streams that we discover upon doing a site visit? So that I find, that's a question I would like to know if Scott has an answer to. Overall, though, I think this is more consistent with the Chesapeake Bay Act in terms of the Bay Act does suggest that people actually define the buffers and have a map of where they are. So I think it is consistent with that. It's not stronger, though, and more enforceable than the 2014 ordinance. The issue was in 2014, in my opinion, there just was inadequate staff. There's plenty of authority within the Bay Act to enforce in 2014, and I did see enforcement actions take place. There are developments that were not allowed in 2014 and activities that were not allowed in 2014 that I've seen happen since. Just down the road from me, I saw someone took a bulldozer and just start bulldozing the buffer, just bulldozing the whole thing. That would not have been allowed in 2014.
Prior to 2014. Yeah, so it was 2014 where the threshold for being regulated by the ordinance changed so much. So yeah, Lonnie, you have a lot of detailed questions, and they're very good questions that help us to figure out, how this physically works. We've all been looking at it so much for the last couple of months, we're not really seeing it anymore, and so it's helpful to have other eyes on it to point out things we need to answer.
Yeah.
I don't want to get
Yeah, I do want to clarify.
too far into the sorry, go ahead.
Before you get too far, I just wanted to say that I really respect all the hard work that you and staff have done on this. And I don't think any of this is a matter of maliciousness on the part of staff. It's a lot to go through. It's a huge amount of text to go through. And so, yeah, I just think these are details that I hope we can consider as we move forward.
Yeah, and like I said, we're and I realize it seems for someone on the outside, I've asked a question, why do I have to wait for an answer? But it does take consideration by multiple divisions here to make sure we get you a correct answer. And there are things that we'll need to change about this ordinance. That's always the case. Whenever you write a new ordinance, you need to get feedback and clarifications and make fixes. But I do want to, without getting, I think I've got 5 minutes here, so not without taking up too much time from the rest of the meeting. So I won't get too far into the answers to the individual questions that I hope to be able to email out to everybody in the next week or so. If things work out. The one difference I want to point out is, Lonnie, you mentioned this is significantly weaker than the previous ordinance. I think it's significantly stronger than what we have right now, in that, what you observe with people bulldozing buffers, there is no county regulation against that in most cases right now. We don't have the ability to protect the buffers unless they are in those larger regulated development projects. We probably did have the power to do that before 2014 when the ordinance was changed. We didn't have the staff to pull it off most times, but the idea now is to get back to that point when we did have the legal authority to do that kind of enforcement. So rather than only regulating large development projects, things like buffers in residential subdivisions. Residential uses are not the primary purpose of the rural areas. We all know there's an awful lot of residential subdivisions out there. And quite frequently people will clear their buffers to get more yard space or to get a view of the water or a view of the mountains or whatever it is. And under this new proposed ordinance, those kind of small casual clearances of buffers that tend to have pretty large cumulative impacts on our watersheds would no longer be permitted. We would have a method to prevent it, and then if it does happen, to require it to be fixed. So that's what we're trying to get to.
So what about the past in 2014, people are not allowed to mow that buffer. So if they had a portion of the buffer that was on their property, regardless of when or that was or wasn't there, they had to, at a minimum, at least stop mowing that 100-foot towards the stream, unless they had some legitimate agricultural exception to that.
Right. I think what's important to get to, and we'll realize one of the things is we identify a preferred vegetation type in this draft, which is, you know, multiple layers of native hardwood forest with the canopy and understory and herbaceous layer and all of that. But having identified it, I'm not sure that we clearly enough say what level of disturbance or not is permitted within those buffers. Mowing a buffer is a great example. If it's not agricultural, I think the intention is not to permit that. But I think we need to be clearer about that in the edits that follow up to the public input we're getting now.
You know, that's great. I think I sent this to you before. I'll send it to the whole committee as soon as I find it again. There's a one-page fact sheet the county had back in 2014 that was like, what can I do in my buffer? Or like, how do I maintain my buffer? And like, my number one recommendation to staff is go back to that one-page fact sheet and make that true again. Because that was a great, it talked about like what activities were allowed and not allowed, and you know how people should behave in their buffer. And I think at a minimum, going back to that standard is a great idea. I mean, personally, I would be fine with adopting the ag portions of the Bay Act. I know that politically there doesn't seem to be the will to do that, but you know, so be it.
I just want to interrupt. I just want to make sure Leah's comment is heard.
Thanks. I just wanted to, I guess, make both a perceptive comment and a content comment. Scott, the format that you've chosen to place on the website is awesome. I hadn't gotten around to looking at this information yet, and it's partly because of that whole concept of, oh gosh, you know, it's going to be a lot of stuff I'm going to have to go through, and I want to do it, but I'm going to put it off. But looking at this invites me in. You've got it divided out into manageable pieces so that people can deal with it and not get dissuaded. You've got nice graphics on there. So again, this isn't about a content thing, but perception is really important. And so I think people will be more interested in it, in this information and in commenting because of the way you've designed that. So well done on that. My content comment is, I think Lonnie answered it probably in the first item that he mentioned to you, which is that it seems as though, from what little bit I'm reading from the screen here, is if a buffer has not been identified in the overlay, then arguably it's not covered. And if that's the case, then that's a real problem because there's no way that everything could be pre-identified. Is that true, that if it's not designated or identified in the overlay district, that it wouldn't be covered?
The way it would start is that we would take the same map that we have right now for buffers in the water protection ordinance. And you can see that on our county GIS, the web GIS, pretty easily. So we would essentially be taking that same map and making it the new overlay. So it's not that we would start out with nothing protected. The question that has come up from Lonnie and others is, what if we find a different stream, or what if we discover that something we thought was intermittent is actually perennial? And so that's, again, as a section we've realized we need to make clearer before we present this to the Planning Commission about how do you change the overlay? Because there are cases where the existing map, when you check it against reality on the ground, turns out not to be right. And so you need to add to it. There's a bit in the proposed code about how to add more, or how to designate more buffers, or to label something as a perennial stream, but we need to add some more to that, make it more clear. So there would be a process for increasing the area covered by the overlay district if facts on the ground show that you need to.
That's good to hear. And I know, like on my property, even, it's just like you said, we have two streams and one is teeny tiny, and it's designated, last map I looked at, or the only time I looked at a few years ago, it's designated as perennial, and then the large stream is designated as intermittent. So it's like they're backwards.
Right.
Yeah. But if it, so that's wonderful that you're gonna, or the staff is working towards having a process for adding things. But if someone wanted to develop something right now in a buffer area on a stream that's not been identified, then because it's not already been identified, does that mean they're kind of grandfathered in until that change occurs? Until it gets added?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that our engineering staff is able to go to sites, development sites, and do stream evaluations according to established protocols and show that something is in fact, for example, a perennial stream. How exactly we get from that point to adding it to the buffer overlay so that we can apply it to a project that's already in the hopper, I don't know off the top of my head, but I will add that to the questions that we're trying to get through about fixing this draft.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I'm thinking, I mean, sometimes it's always easy when we've actually seen some situation, we can apply a concept to a situation. And neighbors across the mainstream from us just put their land up for sale, and my husband and I were just saying, gee, people are, if they want to put their house next to the stream, they're going to clear out all these trees. And my husband's like, well, isn't that the floodplain? And I'm like, well, you know, I don't know that that would stop them. It's a residential development. It'd be a single house. Nobody's going to notice. Nobody's going to be checking that, right?
Well, the floodplain regulations, the flood hazard overlay district, if it's literally part of the FEMA designated 100-year floodplain, then yes, we would be checking, and that would get caught as part of the building permit process. So we're not going to allow a dwelling in the floodplain because of the flood hazard overlay, but that doesn't do anything about vegetation. The flood hazard overlay district is a flood safety regulation about what structures and uses you can put in a floodplain. It's not a biodiversity or vegetation protection ordinance.
Okay, so then therefore,
Which is why
people
we
could
need
put
that,
the
which is why
house-
we need this buffer overlay.
Right. So then people could do what I was thinking, which is they put the house on the top of the hill above the riverbank, and they clear all the vegetation down to the rivers or the creek so that they can see the water.
Under current regs, that's totally true. Yeah. and it quite often-
Okay, then that's still an issue. I don't, just FYI.
Well, it wouldn't be permitted under the new ordinance. It's permitted under the current ordinance.
Okay, as long as the stream has been identified and is on the overlay district.
Right, right.
Yeah, yeah. So it'd be great if there was some way to add things quickly, or have some caveat that as soon as a stream is identified, the rules apply, even before it gets added to the district or the overlay, because that might be something that can only be updated every few years.
Yeah, but there was a process established when the steep slope ordinance was put in place for how to make those kinds of changes to an overlay. And I don't want to try to pull that up off the top of my head because I wasn't involved in that project, but that's a very good question. And I'm adding it to my list of questions about how do we mimic that quicker update process for this. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, thank you.
Scott, just quickly, my suggestion for solving this, I think a lot of the problems in 2014 happened when we tried to merge our water protection ordinance with our stormwater ordinance. And that seems like we're now taking both the stormwater and the water protection ordinance and moving into zoning, but it's still mixed together. I know staff doesn't like redundancy, but I would say that it makes sense actually to have some of the stormwater stuff, including the stormwater bits about buffers, separated and being redundant in that section, because when someone goes ahead and does soil disturbance of whatever square feet we designate, then they should fall under the ENS rules, which also should require buffers. And that should be, if you leave that separate and in there, then you're covered both ways. It's the
I would need to go back and look at the parts that are actually changing in the WPO, which I just don't have it remember around it. As you know, it's hard to memorize 40 pages of ordinance changes, but that's a good point, and I will make a note to double check on that.
Yeah, so I think it's that merger that I think is problematic, and maybe unmerging those sections and allowing them to stand alone on their own, because when there's a big difference between someone coming in and doing soil disturbance and what you should need to do in that moment, and what should be the permanent protections for a stream. And while there's overlap, they may not always be the same thing.
Checking with Frank Pohl, the county engineer, on that board.
Thank you, everyone, for those comments and questions. Yeah, I think those are really good questions. I would also be interested in hearing the answers once, Scott, you guys have time to sit down and kind of go through them.
Yeah, and I'll be happy to share them with the committee.
Would be great.
Can I ask just a quick question, Scott? You had mentioned, is it still helpful if people just say that they are supportive of this? And should we be encouraging that our friends and neighbors simply to voice water protection? Or is that just not helpful at this point? I know you.
It's not that it's not helpful. It's that kind of thumbs up, thumbs down, and there will be both. Input is going to be even more effective at the point where it goes to the planning commission and the board of supervisors for public hearings. That's when people's participation is most effective. Right now, we're welcome to take we support this and we hate this comments, and we've gotten plenty of both. But right now, our real focus is on how do we get this in shape to be considered for adoption. And so how does this work kind of questions are kind of our focus right now.
Okay.
I'm sure that CAPE, the outreach office, will be compiling the stats on the numbers of positive and negative responses and all that, which we can share with the commission and the board. But at the moment, we're more focused on what are your questions and edits.
When do you anticipate this coming? Well, I guess two questions. I do think it would be appropriate for the Natural Heritage Committee to offer an official comment on this policy, including some revisions that we would suggest. But it may also be appropriate to give you some time to do those edits and come back with a new draft. What is the timeline of all this before it comes before the Planning Commission? And is there time for Natural Heritage to come back and propose a detailed list of recommendations after you've had a chance to redraft this?
Yeah, I think there probably is. And don't hold me to exact dates because I haven't gotten total confirmation yet. But basically, if the public input phase is the middle of this month, not that we stop taking comments, but that's the bulk of it is mid-July to mid-August. At that point, we need to be accommodating or answering questions and making changes to the draft ordinance in preparation for a planning commission work session, not a public hearing, but a work session in late September. I hope. So there may be some time in there, although, you know, we're taking lots of people's comments now, so it can be part of that. But after the commission work session, we're going to have to do another round of edits based on that feedback before it goes on to the 2 public hearings that it would have to have before it could be adopted. So I think probably the way to do it is for anybody on the committee who has an interest right now to go ahead and respond to the public input site. And then maybe once you all get a chance to see the revised version that goes out for the planning commission work session, start working on comments based on that as a committee response.
Thanks, that's very helpful.
Wonderful. Scott, I don't think, if no one else has any other comments or questions, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, I think.
Okay, let me pull the agenda back up.
I just hope everybody will, just individually, members will make comment on that.
Yeah, and if I can offer a suggestion, it is a lot of dense material. I know people get scared about reading laws, but the Chesapeake Bay Act is up there on Municode, and I would encourage you all to go up and read the Chesapeake Bay Act, particularly as it relates to resource protection areas, which is what we're talking about here is in RPA. And if you go and read that, you can kind of keep that in mind on one side and then read the draft ordinance on the other side. And you can see very clearly like where maybe our ordinance is weaker or where maybe it's stronger than the Bay Act. And I think that's the measuring stick that we should look at as we're going back and forth between this is, are we weaker or stronger than the other half of Virginia?
Thank you, Lonnie. Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate the one pager, Scott. I am not one that reads law things very well. So that's very helpful.
Just to remind everybody that, you know, there is the, whatever it is, 40-some page total ordinance change document with all the sections. If you want to read that one, you can go to page 26 where the actual new zoning regulations start. Or you can look at the draft of new zoning overlay document, which is much shorter and much cleaner. And that only shows the new section that would be added to the zoning ordinance without showing all of the other changes to subdivision ordinance and things being cut from the water protection ordinance and things like that. Which granted, it takes a long time to get through. So those other documents may be a little more reader friendly.
All right, well, Christine, would you like to update us on future budget proposals as well as the work plan or?
Yeah, I think that, so we've been talking about our 3 priorities, and one of them has to do with invasive plant management on county lands, and also the idea of how do we supporting staff like I mentioned Jessie Wingo earlier and the work that she's been doing to help to organize volunteers in the park. So being able to, so that was number 1, is really supporting those sorts of efforts in county parks and rec. And then the second one was support funding for Stream Health Initiative. And that would also, so that kind of segues into what Scott had said. If we're going to have this overlay district, we need staff to enforce it. And so what is our next step in terms of, should we be advocating for that in the 2025 budget? Because that's what we're looking at, is more funding for implementing the Stream Health initiatives. And Scott, I think, you know, it's difficult. It would be good to know, like, what makes sense. Do we advocate for that staff person to help enforce the overlay, the buffer overlay district? Is that our next place where we should be advocating, or we just do a general thing, but we want to see all those things, all those stream health initiatives supported?
Yeah, when it comes to budget requests, the more focused, the better.
Yeah.
More
But-
general requests, especially when they get vague about the amount, tend to disappear
Yeah, so I think,
as they go through the process.
yeah, so we need one FTE. We're advocating for an FTE who can, and I think that you had even mentioned this could be a part-time staff member. Is it a full-time, full position to for enforcement there? But also, I think that some education needs to happen, because when you talk about the possibility of you have a stream buffer and somebody's been mowing all the way to the stream, and if continued mowing is a disturbance, we're really asking people to let those buffers, the natural vegetation, grow back. And that's going to take a lot of education.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And so that, I'm really thinking you need somebody to enforce and to help spread the word in terms of education about why those buffers are so important.
Yeah, I kind of went back and forth with myself about this for what it's worth. Last time you all met, we had talked about 3 different potential budget proposals. And at first I kind of felt like having the committee, I won't say waste, but kind of give up one of its 3 proposals on something that's already technically supposed to happen, which is to fund a staff person to implement the RBOD. At first I kind of felt like that was a waste, but to be honest, the more I thought about it, the more I thought it is good to have that reinforcement to just make it absolutely clear that that needs to happen. And, the other 2 can be maybe new initiatives that you all feel are important, like the invasive management. But I kind of feel like you're right, and it is worthwhile to get that push from the committee, that to be absolutely sure that the board is aware of the importance of funding that, as you say, enforcement and educational position for zoning.
Yeah. So that's what I would like to propose. And also, what is our timeline? It's coming upon us, I feel like, that we really need to get our act together in terms of writing our letter, because there are going to be those budget talks for 2025 are coming up this fall. That's correct, right?
That's accurate. I think if, a pair of committee members wanted to work on the budget proposals, or if you wanted to have a pair for each of the budget proposals, working together to come up with drafts before the next meeting, so that in early September, we could have you all vote on approving those
I think
proposal memos, then that would be good timing.
I think that's a great idea. I personally am very passionate about the invasive plant management and getting this support staff for Albemarle County Parks and Rec.
I'd second that.
Yeah, so
Can you pull that document up?
which one?
Oh, the priority list.
I think it's in our minutes for
Cool.
our July meeting.
All right,
And
just saying.
the last one had to do with wildlife corridors. So perhaps, Megan, do you want to work with me on? On that.
Invasives, yeah, I think I would like to, I'd be very interested in that. I think with Biscuit Run being built, you're disturbing spaces, which is inevitably going to create an opportunity for invasives to come in. So I think Jesse is doing a fantastic job, but maybe more support is needed. And just general public education, I think I would be happy to help.
And then who would, I don't have it, Lonnie, but we had talked about stream. we also talked about stream health, supporting the stream health initiative.
And wildlife
And then
corridors.
the last one was the wildlife corridors. And I think Leah and Michael, you guys were wanted to focus on that.
Yes, that's right.
Um,
So
but that-
identify opportunities for wildlife crossings and associated management plans.
Okay, but that's still in there, the request for an FTE for enforcement for water protection.
That was that support the stream health. We didn't flesh it out, but I think we can. And I think that the FTE for water for the enforcement of the overlay, the buffer over the riparian buffer overlay. And I also include that there needs to be money set aside for general education and letting the public know and understand why these buffers are important.
I agree.
And maybe it's that one pager that you talked about that you can easily explain to the public.
Yeah, and if you look in the chat, I have put a link to that one pager that already existed. And now I will say that one of the big reasons I encourage the county to be as consistent with the Chesapeake Bay Act as possible is that the state has already developed all those educational materials. And if we use different language than the state uses, then we've rendered all those free educational materials worthless.
Well-
So I think,
Worthless?
yeah, because if we're calling something a riparian overlay buffer district, and they're calling it a resource protection area, then we have to do a lot of editing to make the public understand that the document that's produced for free by DEQ is not is applicable to us. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm not saying worthless, but I'm saying that like there's still a lot of free materials that already exist that we can get from the state if we're more consistent with the state's language. Now, but you just had that document up that I just clicked. But I think that document is a great example of the educational materials we had back in 2014. We should revive and reuse those materials that we had in the past for sure. Because they were great. Like that one, that thing, if we could go back to the 2014 thing, I think it'd be great. Now, I would say, I mean, this is clear, concise. What can't I do in my buffer? What can I do in my buffer area? And consequences. And like, it's just a simple one page. It's very clear. I would, you could almost put this in a mailer and just send it out.
I guess setting aside money for education,
Oh.
wouldn't that be for funding like mailers and
not.
whatnot? Isn't that what we're
Mailer,
doing?
the revisions on something like this, yeah.
It sounds like the free educational materials there, but getting it out was the putting money aside for education, maybe.
I agree. I mean, I guess one reservation that I have too is that in the past, sometimes people say, oh, we can't do such and such ordinance because it would require a lot of money to educate the public first. And, I don't think we did that with a lot of other ordinances like the dogs running at large, or, there's a bunch of other ordinances that we passed. We don't necessarily assume it is the public's responsibility to know about ordinances, we don't have to educate the public before.
Well, I've seen, there is actually a brochure about dogs and dogs running. So I think,
Okay.
yeah,
But was it distributed to everyone in the county, or was it just, I mean, it was produced, but so, I mean, I think I think education should occur. I just don't think we should let an ordinance not be passed for the lack of that education. And yeah.
but of course, right? But I think that in order to make it effective, because there's only so much one person can do with enforcement, and also you want people to comply, you want them to understand why they're complying, you want them to understand the value of it.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't mean to be rude, but I think we're getting a little in the weeds. So we were trying to make teams, I think, for the three our 3 budget priorities, which were wildlife, stream initiatives, as well as invasives. So it sounds like Michael and Leah are gonna work on wildlife crossings. Christine and myself can focus on the invasives. Did anyone want to volunteer for the street health initiative?
Well, obviously I would.
Lonnie, awesome. Thank you, Lonnie.
Um,
Anyone to join Lonnie on that?
There's also a lot of absent members, so maybe we can. Well, and I can also, I can do more than one thing. So it's good to, yeah, as long as it's just groups of 2, I think is the, at a time together. Is that right, Scott? For the no gatherings larger than 2.
And I just want to say that Peggy, you had expressed interest, so maybe Megan and I can take a stab at the invasives and then we can send it by you. How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
So I think that we have 5 minutes left to the meeting, and I think on the agenda, we still have to go over the BAP goal. Dan unfortunately is not here to update us on the Biscuit Run. Scott, do you mind going actually to the agenda? I'm sorry. That's annoying.
What a nice
You
group.
had just pulled up the BAP. I'm sorry. I'm making you do so much work. Okay, I lost track of where I was. Okay, so Dan's not here. Great. So is everyone okay sticking around? We might go past 7 for a little bit, maybe 15 minutes over. Okay, great. Sorry, Scott, we can go back to the BAP. I'm sorry, I didn't realize what you had done. But yeah, so we are talking about rivers more, more rivers. And so,
Yeah, I made a comment. I know that Megan made a comment there. And my comment had to do with, I was on the Rivanna River and they have that wonderful wildflower meadow next to the river company. But as I was walking through it, the lights from the Cosner brothers were shining out. It was really like those urban lights were so disruptive. So it made me think the importance of protecting the really ways of limiting outdoor lighting in the corridor. That
Yeah.
was one of my comments.
I think that's a great idea. And I think, is there an upcoming night, lights out night? Christine, do you know?
Well, oh, that was
It's kind of unrelated, sorry, yeah, but yes, I support your, yes, no lights along the river.
Yeah, I think that's a great, I think that's an important thing. And it can be, there's gonna be a discussion coming up soon, Plan Commission about the lighting. It's gonna be one of the topics that comes up in a work session. So I think it's one of the aspects of that should be considered in terms of lighting. Now, as we develop a lighting ordinance, as we update our lighting ordinance, do you foresee riparian buffers getting being more restrictive than whatever ordinance comes up regarding lighting, or is this just part of support for reforming the lighting ordinance?
I think it should be more restrictive myself. To think about as in that corridor, that they should really either better enforcement in the corridor or more restrictive. So think about lighting over like Free Bridge, or that those really need to be paying attention to the color temperature of the street lighting in those places in particular.
Yeah, there was some in the draft ordinance that was produced. There was some language in there that was going to permit fences and poles and other things. So you might want to look to see in that draft water protection ordinance what it says about lighting in the draft, or what could be interpreted to be about lighting in the draft, because I think that might be something to really dig into.
Would this be something we could tag team with the city? I mean, because Christine, where you just mentioned along the Rivanna River Company, that's technically in the city, I believe.
It does relate to the city. But, then on the other side of the river, that's going to be the county. But yes, and so,
Especially as I think that part of the river, they're looking at developing on the city side for housing, or there's a possibility. So it'd be great to tag team with the city to set those standards and yeah, especially in like around Riverview Park. And I guess I'm a city resident, so I know it's the city side a little better.
oh gosh, you know what? I think these things some of those things I added didn't come out as a comment. And then Megan, I want to hear about what you put in there.
So I added mine based on the possible development, right, where we were just talking about. It'd be great to not have development close to any riverway, which is like the buffer. I was even looking at the Biscuit Run plan, and I was kind of disappointed to see that the paved path goes so close to the Biscuit Run Creek. I understand that ADA is really important, but it just, I don't know, it hit me in a weird way. I was trying to think about it. So that's why I put the comment about the sidewalk was a big part because of the Biscuit Run paved path. I just think of the Riverview Park here in Charlottesville. That area is just, it's paved and it is eroding very, very quickly. And it's kind of heartbreaking to see. So I wouldn't want to see that for Biscuit Run as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I proposed a number 35, which is for a gradual slope, typically based on the VCAP stuff. But if it was greater than a 7% slope, it kind of goes up to 65 feet from the river. But as Lonnie has mentioned before, 100-foot setback is always preferred. I was just trying to be realistic and starting low.
So is the idea that, I mean, because I know currently it's pretty easy to get a waiver. Well, I wouldn't say easy, but waivers do happen for that 100-foot buffer. And I think particularly for the leading 50 feet. So is the idea to put tougher standards on the waiver process, or maybe?
I guess it'd be great if you could remove the waiver so that it makes it tougher to even have a possibility of developing along the river corridor.
Yeah. I guess that would be the thing to think about in terms of like, how do we handle that? I just added an 8 that I just remembered. There's been a lot of discussion at the Planning Commission about low impact development standards, which are allowed in the Chesapeake Bay Act. And they do this through something called, remember I said resource protection areas, or RPAs. There's something called RMAs, or resource management areas. That's an additional, like we're talking about this zoning district, there's an additional layer or buffer that goes in addition to the RPA, where LID is required. So anyone developing in that sensitive area would be required to develop with low impact development standards, including things like permeable paving, enhanced stormwater protection, and so forth. That might be something we should consider, particularly along the Rivanna. If for the construction that's going to occur, even at 200 feet, 500 feet, whatever it is, maybe this should be LID. Now, and some localities have decided to make their RMA countywide, basically saying, you know what, if these are good ideas, there should be good ideas everywhere. Let's make low impact development the rule for the whole county. And so that's an interesting idea as well. But I think at a minimum, maybe along the Rivanna River, we should be more sensitive in the way we develop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely
And
agree.
just to clarify things a little bit, I mentioned earlier that the buffer overlay was one of 14 major implementation items for the Stream Health Initiative. Another one was adopting LID standards. So that's going to be one of the ones we follow up with once we have made more progress on the RBOD. We'll need to start working on some other stream health items. I think the LID item will be one of those, but that's that again is a lot of ordinance amendments, and in a way it's even more complicated than the buffer ordinance in that it's, instead of one major push for a particular kind of regulation, it's lots of little changes throughout all of our ordinances to make more LID practices permitted and even preferred. So it's, we're not there yet, but it's definitely on the upcoming list for the Stream Health Initiative.
And do you remember right offhand what the number is for that, Scott? Stream Health Initiative item number? Because maybe we could put that right there, number next to that piece.
I can look it up.
Oh.
The numbers 1 to 14 aren't a priority number or a order of in which they have to happen,
Oh,
but they do have numbers, and you just need to look it up.
so maybe, I mean, we don't have to put it now, but maybe we put a reference in there, See Stream Health Initiative, you know, item number
X,
eight.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
But again, that's not specific to the buffer overlay or to the Ravenna River. That's meant to, it's a bunch of little, no, I shouldn't say little. It's a bunch of scattered changes throughout our ordinances that would be either countywide or specific to the development areas, depending on the topic.
Yeah, but it would have the benefit, if that was enacted, it would have the benefit of protecting the Ravenna River. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Great. So if anyone thinks of anything else, you can add it as suggesting. I might have sent the link as editing, sorry, which is why they appear as edits, but
Yeah, I can go back and make those my things suggestions, sorry.
yeah. Great. All right.
Put the agenda back.
No, I pulled it up on my
Window
own.
switching.
Does anyone have any educational outreach things to report?
I just want to say something that I'm super excited about. Albemarle County Public Schools they set aside some of their school property as conservation mowing areas. And I'm seeing this actually begin to happen this summer. And so I was really excited. I went by Walton Middle School and they had just mowed a strip around this gigantic field. And the grasses are getting kind of tall out there. So just, I was pretty thrilled to see it. I can't deny it. Could hardly contain myself.
That's great.
So, and they have signs and they're gonna put the signs out there. So
That's
really
wonderful.
excited.
I don't know if you saw, but the Darden Towel was granted money from the county for their native planting in the conservation mowing area. So I think it's just a small part of what they might need, but it's still something. So they're one step closer to installing that, which would be great.
Did they get money through VCAP for that, or?
They have not applied technically yet. They have to have an MOA or some kind of agreement between the parks and the school and who's going to manage it. So we'll have to, they haven't applied, so no.
That's all I have to say for education and outreach.
Great, thank you. Leah, do you have any updates on wildlife corridors?
I do. As a result of that article that was in the Seaville Weekly about the Bobcat Research Project, the Crozet Library contacted me and asked me to do a presentation about wildlife corridors at the end of September. So I will be doing that. Yeah, isn't that great?
Wonderful.
Yeah, and it's so funny too, because the woman that called me is the head of the branch, and I reminded her that she actually had helped out when I had hosted some people from Virginia Tech several years back to come to the area so I could show them some of the potential areas for placing landowner traps and to help encourage Virginia Tech to take on this project. One of the women that I hosted was breastfeeding. And so I arranged I talked to the head of the library to allow the woman to go in one of the conference rooms that had drapes in it so she could breastfeed because we were out all day long. And so we made a trip, made a stop over at the library. So, it's so fun how things circle back around.
That is great. Well, that's wonderful. It's good to hear that the Bobcat study has gotten so much publicity. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone have any other comments they would like to add before we adjourn? All right, so we can call the meeting to an end at 7:08. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for our attendees for coming and sticking with us throughout the whole thing.
And Frederick, you have been a complete gem. I don't believe you when your mom says that you're not a great sweet baby all the time.
He actually is a pretty great baby most of the time.
That's great.
He's beautiful.
He's very
Abigail.
cute.
Oh my gosh, look at that. Oh my,
Wow. He's like 1 month today-ish, right? Roughly.
Yeah, yeah.
oh, he's
So making big progress.
great to meet him in person one of these days.
You can help us with quorum. All right, thank you all.
Line 'em up.
Thank you, Megan. Awesome job.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.